been with us for about a week now. He's working here with Sonia Silo, studying her PhD at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, at the Faculty of Geo-Information, Science and Earth Observation, which is where Kees is based. Kees has actually collaborated with us in the past too. He's worked a lot with Alice when she was doing her postdoc at ITC. For his background, he was educated in Wageningen for his master's, and was employed by FAO for some time, and he's been working at ITC in agronomy, remote sensing, and GIS since then. He received his PhD in the year 2000 from Wageningen, thesis titled Comparative Performance Evaluation of Agroecosystems. And I think today he's going to talk about some of the main achievements featured in his thesis. I think this also relates to some of the work that conducted in collaboration with Alice, looking at rice yields and yield gaps in Southeast Asia, which was published in the European Journal of Agronomy quite recently. And I think without further ado, I'll pass over to Kees. So a big welcome from the Social Science Division, and we look forward to the presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the possibility to present today. It is not my current line of work, but it is a relevant line of work, and good ideas never die. Actually, the idea of yield gaps was born at IRRI by the very authors Data, Gomez, Hecht and Barker in the year 1978. That's where it all started. So basically I bring it back home. Yeah. Yield gap analysis is extremely relevant in the current world because we have to feed future populations, generations. Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Yield gap is extremely relevant.
Yes, already open.
It's open?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay.
Like this?
Okay. Better voice. Yield gap is very relevant, especially if you think about that in many parts of the world, many crops, yield gaps extend from about 40 to even 80–90%, especially in some African countries. So with current technologies, current varieties, please realize that we can still, with proper available technology, produce way more than presently done. The big problem is, however, from how do we study yield gap? How do we actually identify for a certain crop, certain area, what causes these yield gaps? I will start with a series of slides. I try in an easy way to zoom in to mandate concept, hypothesis, etc. And start my first part of the show setting the method of yield gap analysis, which will only be clear to you after I show you the case study. A case study which is already quite an old case study on rice in Thailand, but that shows very clearly the complications of carrying out yield gap studies, especially in farmers' fields. What is important is where IRRI started in research stations and carrying out trials in farmers' fields, we have moved gradually from to a very cost-efficient method, and actually through interviews and surveying, collect plenty of data. That's often the problem. You need a lot of data, and you cannot experimentally carry various settings out in the field. Actually use the farmer settings and go from there to actually quantify from what is relevant for farmers. Now, why do we do this? We have a mandate, clearly specifies we have to identify options to solve future food requirements, which is important today. And of course, we have to understand combating environmental degradation. To do so, we have to gather, manage, classify, map land use system information. And this remains, even today, a very hot issue. And after doing that, we have to study the various aspects of present-day land use systems. Under this, yield gap studies is, of course, extremely important. Now, considering, if you look at an area and you look at the yields between various crops in that region, you will find farmers that get low yield, farmers that get high yield, and you get a certain distribution. Normally, at subsistence level, you will get a skewed distribution. Yeah? There's more farmers getting lower yields. And if you go to a commercial setting, you will get a lot towards economic potential. Yeah? With the farmers that are basically falling off the scale, going bankrupt sooner than later. Yeah. In between, you will get improved conditions. Technology becomes available, inputs become available, services are given, extension is there, and gradually farmers do get access to technology, but they have to go through a shape-like learning curve to adopt. Clearly, you talk about yield gaps if farmers have not fully adopted technologies that are available and that are economically feasible. So we are somewhere here, most of the time. Our questions today are, why do yields vary between those fields? Typically biophysical. Rice does not respond to the cost of fertilizer, it responds to how much fertilizer is applied. In the field, it's typically biophysical. The second question is, why are farmers not adopting, which is typically socioeconomic. This is a modified figure, you can find many, and actually we are zooming in to the difference between actual yield and economic yield. There are technically on-farm yield potentials, experimental yield potentials in the research station, and simulated yield potentials. Of course, the scale is different than in reality, but just to show you the variability of the various levels we talk about, this is the one that's relevant to farmers in the field. We need a concept where you see where the socioeconomic part, the land user, the holder, is part of that, who has certain goals, who has knowledge about his biophysical conditions, who has knowledge about the socioeconomic environment, who makes the decisions, socioeconomic, related to land use. What to do, which inputs to use, when to apply what, to impact on land, to change land, to remove problems, etc., to get more outputs. This concept is basically nice because we can study requirements, such as suitability, like land evaluation. We can study the processes of decision making. We can discuss the impacts on the land. We can have productivity studies. We can have impact on or from the environment, environmental impact assessments, and interactions with secondary production systems, etc. We zoom in on the central block and say, okay, we can make a hypothesis. Performance is a function of land and land use, operations that the farmer carries out. Performance is, for instance, yield, but it can also be the impact on land. What you do can cause erosion, can cause creation of a high flow density, salinity, and whatever. That's all performance. Land are the characteristics of land. Land includes soil, terrain, landform, infrastructure, investment. The crop is an aspect of land. The land use is actually the management, the operation sequence, the planting, the plowing, the puddling, the planking, fertilization, etc. Typically, at farmers level, you can collect a limited amount to survey, seeing yourself, observations, measuring yourself in the field. What you cannot measure, you have to ask the farmer. Especially in management, you cannot be present all the time to see what he is doing. You have to ask, what did you do, when, how, what, etc. Now, comparative performance analysis, strictly biophysical initially, it addresses growth limiting, yield reducing, land modifying aspects of land use systems. And basically, where you are, feasible production differs, problems differ, management differs. So it is a stochastic world, based on the fact that it is stochastic, that everything differs from location to location. We have the option to study it through studying these differences through survey. Yeah? Survey various plots, various farmers, various management, various conditions. Study again the differences that farmers actually have achieved. Why do some farmers get very high yields? Why do some farmers get very low yields? This includes, for instance, of a specific growing season of a specific crop, all the operations that examples are plowing, etc., etc., but also observations. Yeah? Like erosion, germination, trampling, pest attack, hailstorms, etc. They also impact on land. Non-intentional aspects of the environment that define, reduce, limit yields. You have to include this in yield gap studies. Okay, how does this link to socioeconomics? We basically have a level at plot level where the land and the land use define the benefits or yields. Farmer aims also to limit production variability. He aims to conserve the environment, like these aspects. So basically you can say this is a function of that biophysical. Now at the level up, one level higher, holding level, this is where really the farmer makes a decision what he will do. He looks at his conditions, he looks at his settings, he looks at his knowledge, what he has, tendency arrangements are important, his own specifications, other activities, etc. To do what? To maximize the level of holdings profit. To reduce costs, to use the use of non-renewable inputs, optimize labor, conserve environment, etc., etc. This is just example. So, important is this are goals, is a function of. This is typically socioeconomic. How do then organizations deal with that? Then you have to go one level up. Organizations have other goals. Create socioeconomic framework, maintain food security, generate wealth, preserve biological production potentials, etc. And that is a function of, they have certain tools, means to guide, steer, provide incentives, etc. so that they influence the decision making of the farmer. Very helpful. This is how it links to socioeconomics. Let's look at actual data. To make things more clear. Yeah, you're still with me all? Okay, thank you. This is an old study already, but I like the study because it shows all kind of aspects of yield gap analysis. So for presentation purposes, it is an excellent study. It relates to work done by Jozef Oibo for his masters. I have reanalyzed the data for my PhD. It's published in my thesis. It relates to sticky rice in the area northeast of Chiang Mai in Thailand, where basically 63 fields, plots, individual plots, were surveyed, farmers were interviewed, and where the yields, because that is what it is all about, varied substantially. In this year, when this survey was carried out, some farmers got 0 yield. Some farmers got 5.5 tons. Well, this is really something. What a difference. The advantage of these data is that they were pretty normal distributed. It gives you statistically some benefits. Also, the advantage is that what the farmers told Mr. Oibo is the yield achieved matched quite well to the yield measured in the field. So we could rely on what the farmers did report. Now at the end of the study, we did manage to explain 83% of this variability. Yield gap analysis relates to what causes this variability. First of all, where is the rise in power? At that time we had three beautiful ETM imagery, which you can combine in a three-periodic NDVI, which can be integrated in a map, and where you can see basically that we have areas with high intensity rice cultivation, 2 crops, sometimes 3 crops a year, and then the light green areas with low crop intensity areas, 1 crop a year. The farmer practiced a series of operations. I show here the dates and the variability between farmers when they did what. Simply a statistical presentation on operations. Then we go to correlations, data screening, or how do you say, simple presentations, relations between yield and a certain parameter collected. That can be graphical, it can be tabular, it can be through histograms, it can be through how do you call it, simple regression, and in this case it is a yes-no answer, so it must be tabular, which shows the farmer complained about drought. Questions were, when did you experience drought? Finally, when he experienced drought related to a difference in yields. Very clearly, never any drought, you got almost 4 tons, and when you reported drought on these two, early or during vegetative stage, you lost almost half your production. Yield gap studies and drought, in this case, are important. The year that we surveyed was a bad year for farmers. There was a lot of rice blast. It happens about once in every 10 years, and this was one of these years. 63 farmers complained about severe rice blast. We asked about what is the area of your rice field. We call it touched, or we call it infected by rice blast. And how did that correlate with yields? 64%. And should it be included in our final analysis? Because the question here is that if you have one problem, it often happens that you also have another problem. You get a lot of autocorrelation between your parameters. This needs to be studied before you do the final analysis. Another typical example is lodging. Strong winds. Lodging did happen. 31 farmers did not suffer. They got reasonable yield on average. If it happened during heading and flowering, you will come back to 2.3 tons. And during yield formation, even all the way to 2 tons. Had a severe impact. Important to know. Another aspect, this is still data screening, data pre-analysis, trying to grasp what information you have. Here we are looking at the length of the crop growing period as related to the planting date. Farmers planted relatively early to relatively late. Sticky rice, the varieties grown in Trouwen, are photosensitive. If you plant late, you still harvest at the same time as a farmer planting early. So planting late means you have a shorter length of the crop growing period. Now how did that then relate to yields? Complete scatter. Does that mean there is no relation with yield? No. It means many other parameters influence at the same time. Does not mean we should not put it in the final analysis. Final analysis through regression, stepwise multiple regression, still the choice of method. Perhaps we should move to a more modeling type of method in the future. But this shows flooding. Parameter 1 comes in, I get 41% aspect. Parameter 2 comes in, I get 61. And at a certain moment, hardly it increases anymore, and you stop, because that is where you have captured the main parameters that explain the main variability. The problem of this regression analysis is, okay, it's scientific, it's statistics. You have to translate it. Yeah, you have to present this differently. This is, by the way, not the end of presenting your final results. One way is just tabular, that you say, average farmer for this parameter had this value, the best farmer had this value, what is the difference, and because of this factor, what will be the yield gap because of this factor. Now here I have to put in some warning. The factor that comes in is the parameter from your database. That parameter of your database might be strongly correlated with something else in that region or with other parameters, autocorrelation. Remember? So you have to be very careful on how do I interpret this very parameter. For instance, if three sequential crops are grown, if I grow more crops, I get more yield for each and every crop. No, that's not true. Turn it around. Because I have water, I can grow 3 crops. And because I have no water, the rice will get a higher yield. So I can map where 3 crops are grown. And that's indicative for where farmers get more water. So you have to interpret one by one and be very careful and understand what is really at hand. And that happens with all of these parameters. The tabular presentation can also be given as a graphical presentation. Average farmers' fields of the survey fields was about here, 2.5 tons. The best farmer got 5.5 tons. These were the factors not yet interpreted that explained the variability. In the research station close by Chiang Mai, the actual yield they got was very less than the best farmer. Interesting. And the potential yield they calculated through the then available software was more or less equal to the best farmer. So, well, we can interpret it various ways, but it gives an overview from how big the yield gap is and which factors play a role. Now we have to do some interpretation of these factors. For instance, very clear what came out is water shortage. Water shortage related to a location problem. Where did farmers not have water? Where could they not grow more than 1 crop? And also importantly, we did some measurements related to infiltration rate of these fields. Where did farmer farm on fields with a very high infiltration rate? Because there also water loss from fields was very high, and they actually reported that they suffered from water problems. Not much can be done about it, but a planner will know from, okay, why should we waste water where we lose it to a high infiltration rate? Yeah. Maybe you can use it. That year, the disease incidence very, very high. Now, a problem with this type of surveys is it is a one-time, one-year survey. It gives a conclusion for that year, but that doesn't mean every year you can come up with the same conclusion. The risk aspect is not yet included. Long-term repetition of this type of surveys have never been done by anybody. Yeah? To actually also capture the variability of the factors causing this yield gap and the accompanying risk that relates to that. A farmer knows, and the decision making of the farmer will be influenced by these factors. Late planting, yeah, related clearly to labor availability. The community went to plant 1 field, then they moved to the next field, and they took about 6 weeks to plant the area. Next year they went to a different field to start, so some years you were lucky, some years you were unfortunate. The cost of planting did not change, but the losses were enormous. What can you do? Direct seeding, yeah, getting a transplanter, we need some answers here, or the farmers needed some answers. Lodging, maybe get another variety, shorter straw, something stronger, I don't know. The poor soil condition and filtration rate is again a location problem. Actually, why should you even grow rice there? You're wasting water, while other farmers are also suffering from water shortage. But they have pretty good soil, so an optimization area-wise might be in place. This is only a short discussion of, well, the complication of the findings. Here I redefine it by land characteristics, and here I redefine it by, okay, what can plant breeders possibly do? Resistance to drought, resistance to disease, resistance to lodging. What can extension services do? They have to look at water management, timely planting, control of diseases. Funny enough, yeah, fertilization never came in. Farmers did fertilize. The management of fertilization was poor. The products differed a lot, the timing differed a lot, the method of application differed a lot, the impact could not be measured, which actually is also a finding. You do not expect that fertilizer does not have an impact. But their poor management of fertilizers and that it did not come up as being important is also a result. Yeah? Okay. Let's move on to my last slide related to the yield gap. These are actually farmers from the area in Gouwen. Leisure people, military people. And I hope they're still smiling. I have maybe a few additional slides. Few additional slides before we start the questioning. What is important in Philippines, I've shown this to colleagues here already, is looking at hypertemporal imagery and see what the support can be concerning the mapping of rice cropping systems. Spot is one of the possibilities of data that will support this exercise. Modus is another very important set of data. Important is that better and better data are becoming available, and methods need to be studied and further expanded to actually come up with legends that tell you in time how the crop calendar of certain areas is and how they are related. And of course, this is an intermediate legend that needs to be translated in what is it in reality. How much of a certain area is actually grown to rice? How much is not grown to rice? What rice system is in place, etc. When are these crops planted and harvested? Then the very last slide, linking. If you know where rice is grown, only then you have the possibility to properly monitor through remote sensing through different methods. Like you can start very early measuring weather, putting that in crop count models and trying to estimate the yield. That will be most likely water limited, possibly nutrient limited yield. You can also go one level down. Through remote sensing we can also measure growth. Make an estimate of evapotranspiration of the surface. If there is growth, there is biomass production, and therefore if you use this, you can go closer to actually. Another possibility with remote sensing is to measure the variable index, biomass. Again, closer to monitor actual yields. This is an example in the Mekong of a PhD student Mrs. Ha, who has measured leaf area index in the field, and at this level, through remote sensing, got estimates of leaf area index. Let's see, just through a soil leaf canopy model, and she got really beautiful, acceptable results, which could be put in the Orisa crop count model with these results. And now we are talking about for getting close to an operational method, making the note that in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam, areas are very uniform. Yeah? The moment you get heterogeneous areas like here in the Philippines, you get further complications and accuracy problems. But at least you are building methods. Possibilities are there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kees, for the nice lecture on comparative performance analysis and the application in Thailand. There's a very interesting point for discussion there about how we try to interpret and capture variability and how we turn that into, if you like, actionable information. It's all very well to say to people these are the reasons for a particular gap, but how that gets translated into something that can be used to have an impact to change the situation, I think is a real challenge for us. So I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who'd like to follow up with some questions or some observations. All right.
The data that we use comes from the interview, the 63 observations. How many seasons?
One season,
Only one season.
which is a problem, I told you. Most of the data come from interview and on-site surveying, looking at soils, looking at plant residues, looking at information. In this case study, no soil analysis data were used.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering, if you get good to interview, you should have data on fertilizer. And fertilizer is one of the most important factors. It's affecting yield variability, not exactly yield gap, but you did not include it. It seems that all the variables that you include are more of exogenous or not under the control of the farmer. And then when you discuss yield gap between farmers. So I think that what you're presenting are just yield variability, not exactly yield gap.
Well, that's now the trick for you have to first know what causes the variability between farmers.
Yeah.
And then it is of course important for to see from, wait a moment, does this make sense? Like fertilizers are not included.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Input, it's not included.
It makes sense if you know that the systems there's continuous inflow of silt from the mountains through the irrigation system. And also that you know that farmers really use very low amounts and in a poor, using very poor methods.
But how come other farmers are getting 5 tons?
Yeah,
I don't
they
believe
are.
that they use very low amount, considering it is a glutinous rice.
Yeah.
So the factor that might be cause the big yield gap, 5 tons to 0 or much lower, might be fertilizer, and then you are missing that in your analysis.
It is always possible because you use stochastic data from reality. That there is a correlation between two parameters. You have to be extremely aware of such problems. Therefore, also analyzing these data requires a skilled scientist. Over here, I know, I've looked at it, it was not correlated. Whatever way I tried to analyze the data, there was no correlation with fertilizer use, application numbers, amount numbers. It was not there, and I couldn't help it. It was not there. Yeah. Another important note I have to make here is why did we not include soil analysis data? In several other yield gap studies, we did sample the soils and did extensive laboratory work and included those data in the yield gap analysis studies. With only the finding that seldom to never standard soil analysis data do explain, and that's sometimes amazing, sometimes not amazing. Important is that you have to somehow capture soil land characteristics that are directly related, like infiltration rate versus water loss. So look at specific aspects. For instance, is there a plow tank? Can you survey that in the field? How thick is the plow tank, etc. But try to capture those parameters that you know are immediately related to this, then you have a way better chance of capturing those aspects that do matter, that do explain variability in the data. That's the experience we have.
You mentioned about blast. What blast are you referring to? Are you referring to leaf blast or neck blast?
No, it is the grain.
So that's neck blast. Did you also find leaf blast? Those that affect
I
the
saw it on the
lesions
grains.
which you can find on leaves?
But you can fertilize on your leaf.
Please be aware that these cells from this study cannot be transported to another area. That is one of the problems of yield gap studies. The findings are true for that very setting. You cannot apply and suddenly go to another country and say, for this is the yield gap here. No, you have to carry out data collection and data analysis. The variability by causes of yield gaps vary enormously where you are and the setting.
Yeah, I have to apologize in advance if these are repetitive questions. I came a little bit late. So I have two questions. The first would be to follow up on Kai's question, and that would be in terms of fertilizer use. You also look at fertilizer timing for application, some planetary variables. And then the second would be in terms of the biotic yield reductions. Are these farmer reported, or did you have expertise in diagnosing all the possible biotic yield reducers so that you're sure it's really blast or brown spot compared with other biotic syndromes?
It is basically as reported by the farmer.
So they could be conflating a lot of other things with blast.
It is basically the skill of the researcher, in this case Mr. Oibo, to validate in the field, through pictures, etc., through his knowledge also, what is this correct? But also checking again, after asking the farmer for what problems did you encounter, what was the incidence rate, and how, to what effect did it impact on your productivity, to ask leading questions from you didn't get this, you didn't get this, you didn't get that, to confirm really what it was, what did not happen. So interview skills are challenging related to this type of research.
But it may still be also farmer knowledge. There are certain syndromes that are easier to observe and that there's more knowledge of than there are others.
Well, a farmer will often say, I have this problem and it looked like this, and here are samples that they have no idea, which I encountered about 5 years ago in Rwanda, Kees in Rwanda. Stunted growth of the rice, yellow discoloring, and no yield anymore. What is it? The farmers were sitting like that. Of course, we went through all the IRRI-Social description of the diseases and became a disease which was not supposed to happen in Africa or in Southeast Asia. I forgot the name of it. Tunro, yes, it was Tunro. It might be. What I did encounter also was the IRRI guy in the area putting all kind of new varieties and testing them. So I don't know if 1 and 2 were correlated or not. I don't dare to say more.
Yeah, actually it's a nice presentation because you combine both biological and biotic tests in explaining in depth.
Yes.
But I have several questions actually, especially
Please.
for my understanding.
Please.
How do you measure yield gap, number one? And
How
how do you measure the yield gap? So you have a best farmer and then poor farmer and decrease the gap, right?
Yeah.
And if it's the question, then my argument is that you should include, whether you include it or not, some farmers' characteristics in the model. Where you estimate this one?
Yeah.
And what kind of estimation you use? Is it OLS estimation for irrigation? You use OLS ordinary least squares? If it's the case, then I have a bit strong argument that
Yeah.
maybe it's a kind of biased explanation because you see that water shortages and heat shortages might be highly correlated with disease.
Yeah.
And another one is only 1 year data,
Yeah.
and you are missing farmers' characteristics. This means some of the variables are really is giving you biased results. And importantly, you mentioned that there are some farmers, actually the yield is 0. If this is the case, then you cannot work on each square. Maybe you can use some public model or some other things, otherwise,
Yeah,
these are the things.
I've been paying attention. Thanks. A lot of good questions. Ordinary least square has a problem, and I know all these aspects are included in a linear fashion, or when we saw there was a quadratic function, you fit a quadratic function. But I think in this type of work, knowing relationships for how one thing impacts on growth and when it impacts on growth asks for actually a model, empirical type of modeling that links these things in and actually asks for an approach that you do calibration of that model of these various factors. That would be a way better approach than till date nobody has done that. Yes, it is 1 year data, which I have commented on. It's not sufficient to also assess risks, yeah, which is needed. Think. It's farmers' characteristics were included in many of the yield gap studies we carried out. But for instance, what training did he get, education, is it a master farmer or not? And sometimes it comes out as significant, but it doesn't explain then what really did he do different. It just rings a bell from wait a moment, I did not capture everything, but the differences between these farmers are. What we normally do for the better interviews, the rating by the interviewer, and the, what do you call it, the better response you get, you give a weight to your interview and include that into your regression as a weighing factor. Zero yields, yes, is a big problem, and I will refer to another chapter in my thesis on mango, yield gaps in mango, where 50% of the farmers got zero yield and 50% of the farmers got enormous yield. Why this difference? And check how we analyze that. Will be interesting. Creates complications.
But if you want to emphasize on management,
Sorry?
if you want to emphasize the yield gap is a function of management, then you should go for farmers' characteristics. Because management is very endogenous.
I have never seen rice responding to a farmer. You talk to rice, you can show money to rice, whatever. It will not grow fast. It's biophysical. Yeah, we can argue on that. Yeah.
This is more on the methodology of the stage. Yes, I think you all need to do this work and understand what causes yield gap. But what you can do with this, indeed, you have your skewed distribution and you can try to bring the farmers from the left to the maximum curve. But it doesn't show you how we can move all farmers towards high yield.
Yeah.
I mean, suppose we did this in 1950 in Asia, you would have concluded that maximum yield is 2 tons per hectare, economic best yield maybe 1.5, shift everybody there, and you would still be stuck.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very good part of the story, but we also need to look ahead. How can we shift the whole? And then you probably need different tools.
Well, what was not done in this study, in this case study, is actually go back to the farmers, which we have done in a study in Zimbabwe, with maize. After we identify the factors explaining yield gaps, the biophysical factors, we go back to the farmers and ask them, why did you do this? Why so much? Why not more? Why too late? Why not, yeah? Why winter plowing? Why not summer plowing? Why this? And you actually ask or try to probe the decision-making process in his mind. And of course, if you get that picture also, and of course, if you see over time, yeah, during the last 30, 40 years, and see how that picture changes, you get way more grip. This is only a start what I have shown. It is showing the importance, showing that it gives you answers, also that it raises questions, yeah? But that is important too in research, that you have to know from wait a moment, this is not normal, why not fertilizer in this area? And that you have to monitor and see from the technology trend improves, the ceiling improves, are farmers really responding to it, and why not?
Yeah, but how, the question we are dealing with,
Yeah.
how can we make that ceiling move?
Yeah.
And you can't do that by just studying the current practice.
No.
To do that,
No.
you do need probably to invest in simulation models, understanding photosynthesis,
Yeah.
and you get the window of opportunity. But then you need to look, well, how can we close that or move the whole set of farmers along?
I
I
subscribe
think we agree
to
on
that.
that.
I subscribe to that. Actually, that work is also needed. Let's put it that way. Both types of work are needed. We have to work on developing technologies, but all at the same time we have to know which technologies are available and are not adopted and why.
In your recommendation, she said that disease should be controlled. And yet there was no question as to how farmers manage diseases. Are they currently managing the disease in the drought area?
Yeah.
Could
Well,
they be
I
on the
refer
side?
to the full article because they did spray, but not this. They were, how do you call it, left without help related to rice grass. They didn't know what to spray. So all kind of management that was also included, but not relevant enough that to explain the yield gap. I have not shown today.
This could also be really good.
Yeah.
But they only grow one kind of variety, sticky rice.
The different varieties of sticky rice. They
Different
have
varieties
local,
of sticky
really
rice.
the local land races varieties. They still grow them, and they have the so-called improved varieties.
Yeah, could you go back to the regression slide, I guess, the results?
Which one?
I have the regression results. Yeah, that one. Okay. So the dependent variable here is actually rice yield rather than a yield gap, right? Is that correct?
Again,
The actual dependent variable on the left-hand side of your
Yeah.
regression is actually rice yield rather than a yield gap, right?
actual rice yield.
Correct. So this is essentially just a production function
Yes,
estimation.
yes, absolutely.
So again, my comments, I echo some of the
Yeah.
comments that was done before that,
Yeah.
that this is sort of a stepwise where I guess I'm an economist, so we sort
Yeah.
of rely on models rather than do a stepwise regression, putting it in and looking if it's significant,
Yeah.
taking it out, because that's problematic in itself. Okay, now going back to the issue that was raised in terms of input use and characteristics. You mentioned that there is sort of effects of education on yields. And if you omit that, then that means there's an omitted variable bias that biases the result. So how could you convince me that these parameters included in the regression is really significant? So that's the problem here. So you have to be, your regression results has to be convincing. And on top of that, the zero, what proportion of the sample is zero?
Only 2 samples.
Okay, so that's not problematic. So you can just take that out and then the remaining can be used for the regression. But still, the method here, that's the problem, I think, that is that the method you use is not convincing enough to tell me that these are causal factors affecting yields.
I would love to give you the data set. I have them with me. Yeah. You can have the complete data set, or I have actually for some statistical training a tuned down data set. And well, analyze as you like econometrically. But actually I know that the linear regression, the stepwise regression is well, it's a beginning of method how to analyze these type of data. And somehow somebody in future needs to make the next step to improve the method of analyzing these data. I know that.
Can I follow up the question? What would you suggest?
Well, because again, there's lots of things you can suggest. The thing is, I'm an economist, so the training for production function is in essence You start with yield as a function of input use. So the fact that there is no input use, nitrogen, phosphorus, labor, and all that stuff is by itself problematic. So you could include all those variables in. Do not do the stepwise. If it's insignificant, it's insignificant, right? And then whatever is remaining, then that should be the ones that you would probably say that's are factors that influence. So you do not, just because one factor is insignificant, you take it out. So that's sort of what economists call a data mining thing, that you're picking variables that are significant to show that they're significant. So that's the problem. And then, of course, you could go through all the other, and did you check for all the OLS diagnostics? You're talking about autocorrelation, but I think what you mean is multicollinearity, because autocorrelation is sort of a time series concept. So, did you check for heteroscedasticity? These are lots of diagnostics not presented, so it's hard, for me to be convinced that these are causal factors that causes yield gaps. So a more comprehensive sort of analysis of all the diagnostics for linear regression should be.
I think you are enhancing a few of my statements that I made myself. The importance is there. The relevance to identify what really matters is high. That it cannot be done by simple surveys and training people and sending them out to the field is also clear. That the data analysis is quite a challenge and needs a skilled operator, both statistically as related to the science, knowing the environment, knowing the crop, knowing the farmers, is there. So, but yeah, how to combine all these together? Is it too difficult for us? And then we say, so we don't do it this way, we just make a fertilizer trial with 5 steps, and that is the impact of fertilizer. And then you have 1 degree of freedom. At least I have 60. Yeah? Okay.
We have one round
that down to further research. I think you all had a question. Anyone else? I'm sorry, I can't see behind this pillar. Any questions? Yes, please.
I really appreciate the seminar because being an agronomist, I have seen that there are factors that could cause yield reductions, the physical stuff. I would subscribe to the statement of Bas that, and ask the same question, like how do we move this low-yielding farmers to the high-yielding part of the curve? Looking at these parameters that have been identified as major factors affecting yields, then one agronomist would probably think, then how do we resolve these issues from an agronomic standpoint? How do we help farmers improve their technologies by bringing them the right technologies? Like for lodging, for example, bringing them the right varieties, lodging of drought resistance, and stuff. And then the next thing that would probably be done is to do the next analysis of how we improved and how closer are we to that, bringing the reductions. That's a question for next.
In fact, you want to say from the results actually influence research agendas and the means of various organizations. Knowing what really happens or what is really the matter might influence what you will do in the field, what your research agendas will be. But then the question is, okay, do you trust this one? You want an example, in another area you will get completely different results. Do you need this information? Yeah.
But it is, I think it is kind of standard practice that most of our projects and activities you go in and do a needs and opportunity assessment. And whether you use this tool or your more sophisticated tools or my tools by just asking a lot of questions to the farmer in a survey manner and then also figuring out what I need, and then you follow up indeed with tackling the researchable issues and putting in hopefully the right technologies and research that develop. So I'm not so sure. I think we we do this a lot, but we just call it needs and opportunity analysis, and that is basically step 0 before you do anything.
Well, if I created misunderstanding, I'm sorry. Of course, there are many ways that you do wrong, and the clear advantage related to other possible methods is that this type of yield gap analysis sometimes lead to a lot of surprises, things you have completely overlooked. An example, or even 2 examples. In the same area, a lot of mango is grown, and I told you there is sometimes frequently totally 0 yields, and some farmers drive a machines, they get so much production. Now, one of the outcomes was, but if there are more rocks in the soil, stones in the soil, you get higher yields. So, the innocent may say, well, okay, let's start fertilizing stones. But that's not the fact. In fact, if there are more stones, soils are more prone to drought, they dry out faster, and a tree will only flower if it is exposed to drought. That's a physiological aspect of the mango tree. Okay, that was a simple one. Then a more complicated one. A farmer that plowed even when there were no weeds in between his mango trees, suddenly got very high yields, and the farmers that did not plow got 0 or practically nil. So what has plowing to do with one and another? Ever heard of root pruning? I found it back in literature somewhere in the 1960s. Since then it has been forgotten. If you do root pruning on the subsurface roots of the mango tree, you create artificial drought, because those roots are very important to take up water. Yeah? So flowering is actually induced by plowing. That had a huge impact, because having production is depending on having flowers or not. There were a lot of trees that were very close to paddies that were standing in water. Beautiful trees, huge trees, never flowered. There was simply no drought amongst those trees. If you look in the African landscapes and see where mango grows, it's always a certain distance from the river. Yes, it needs water, and yes, it needs drought. That is very narrow ecological zone. In Thailand at this moment there are a lot of research programs. Actually, they spray the tree with hormones and induce flowering, just to solve this problem. Let the tree grow in the paddies, but spray it. Yeah, end of story. But in Brown, the farmers really invested a lot and got 0 yields, and they did not know why. And we got a lot of surprises by explaining the vines, but at least we knew where to start.
Alright, last comment. I think you must also remember that all of these factors are already being researched by IRRI, and in fact they have already output on that. We have short plants to control lodging, we are studying water management. We really know that water sources during heading and flowering will affect the yield. You don't need any recreational study, nor interview the farmer. And then incidence of other diseases, it's also being studied. So, and there is still yield gap. So the yield gap is not those factors.
No.
I think we should look at other factors other than that.
Yeah. Well, you are in a different situation. So this was in Brown. You are in the Philippines. So
Yeah,
if you don't
particularly
know,
Thailand, I think. Well, particularly, I'm sorry, but because we are dealing with glutinous rice, maybe, but it is not one of the major type of rice that will solve food security.
no.
I think the objective of this study was to describe was to understand what's going on in that area.
Yeah. It points out that in different situations with different varieties and different circumstances, climate, environments, irrigation schedules, methods, etc., different factors may play a role. If you go up the learning curve, old factors may drop off because farmers have learned how to cope with that, and they will not explain yield gap anymore, and new factors might come in. So it is also something that relates to time. That is why If you don't know why the Philippines still has a yield gap, then I say maybe this is the road to go to home to find out.
And I think on that note, thank you all for your questions and comments. That was an excellent session.